Social characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. Social characteristics, let's start with the poorly developed social skills. Um, some examples of those social skills are avoids eye contact, does not show facial expressions, few or no gestures used, does not notice other children, does not pretend, and does not interact with other children. Now, the things that I have observed in an 8th grade classroom. So the first thing that I can take out is we don't pretend very often in an 8th grade classroom. So does not pretend is something that I didn't really see a whole lot of while I was in my classroom. We just, at that level, at 13, 14 years old, we weren't playing pretend that frequently. Now, we did write fictional things, and in that sense, a student might play pretend on their own. We created stories about pumpkins for Halloween, and so the kids had to think up stories of a pumpkin at Halloween for themselves, but they did not pretend with other students. Avoids eye contact is one that I see a lot in my classes, especially with 8th graders and especially with wearing masks still. For whatever reason, I don't see a whole lot of eye contact or facial expressions due to masks and I know that sounds silly to not see eye contact because of masks. But often my students will wear their mask and then they wear their hats and they wear their hoods, and those are things that are allowed at our school. And so I don't see a whole lot of the students' faces. So if I hear their voice, that is often their way of interacting with me. I don't see this eye contact and I don't see these facial expressions. Because a lot of them are still wearing masks. So I don't know if I have a real good sense on the facial expressions in regards to those things that I've observed in the classroom. Few or no gestures used. Honestly, I can agree with this one. Don't see a lot of gestures in their everyday talk. I personally use my hands to talk. I frequently probably overuse my hands to talk, and that's not something that I see in my classroom. Does not interact with other children. I did come to learn that on the 8th grade level, when given the opportunity to either work with a peer or sit by yourself, there were quite a few students who would rather sit by themselves and not work with a peer. The next social characteristics that we're going to talk about is difficulty with expressive and receptive communication. So let me go over those really quick. Does not notice when others are hurt or upset. Does not share interests, yet has obsessive interests. Tends to communicate more to ask a question or protest than be social. Difficulty in formulating thoughts and expressing them correctly. Difficulty with pronunciation, to tone, and facial expressions. Things that I have seen in my classroom, okay? The things that I have seen in my classroom are tend to communicate more to ask questions or protest than be social. This was a statement that when I was doing my research, I read it and like the light turned on. I was like, oh my gosh, yes. I would see that in my classroom all the time. I would see students ask questions all the time. Not so much protest. I didn't have a lot of students that would protest what was going on in my classroom. They would ask questions after question after question. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but sometimes they would ask the same question over and over, even though I had already answered it, okay? The does not share interests yet has obsessive interests. I did see this frequently in my classroom as well. Students love to talk to me about their interests, which I think that is a step for them. Yet when asked did you talk to so and so about this interest because they like the same thing? My students would reply, no, no, no. I didn't talk to them. Like no desire to even talk to them, even though they have a very strong interest in the same thing. Um, does not notice when others are hurt or upset. I really didn't have um, very many students get hurt or upset in my classroom. Uh, I think the thing that I might have noticed the most is um, one of my students with autism would get annoyed or frustrated when another student would tattle. So, for example, I had these students 6th and 7th period. They had a different teacher 5th period, and a student would come in and tell me, our class was so bad during 5th period today. And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, thank you for the information. And, then my student who is on the spectrum would come in listening to all this and say, why'd you have to tell her? Why did you have to say anything? He would also say that in a very monotone voice. I could tell that he was frustrated because I knew him, but if you didn't know him, you might not understand what he's trying to say because he wasn't good with the pronunciation to tone and facial expressions. Okay? Difficulty in formulating thoughts and expressing them. I mean, that was something that was very frequent in my classroom. Some of my students would take a lot longer to express things than others. And once again, you could see some of that frustration in the classroom upon waiting for someone to actually be able to express their thoughts. Okay, so next we have the characteristics of restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Okay, so we line those restrictive and repetitive behaviors are lines up objects and gets upset if order is changed, repeats words or phrases over and over, gets upset by minor changes, must follow certain routines, flaps hands, rocks body. Okay, so when I talked about it earlier, I talked about my students asking the same question over and over, even though it's already been answered, they'll still ask the question over and over. I would frequently see this with activities that they were excited about, but they wouldn't show that they were excited in the questions. For example, our students did Knott's Berry Farm at the end of the school year. The 8th graders got to go. And I had one student who would ask me over and over, what day are we going to Knott's Berry Farm? You're going on the last day of school. Okay, 2 minutes later. Miss Snider, what day are we going to Knott's Berry Farm? You are going to Knott's Berry Farm on the last day of school. So you could tell that he's excited about it. He's obsessed over it. It's not leaving his mind, but yet he constantly wants to be reminded of when he gets to go. Okay. Gets upset by minor changes. I would see that frequently in my classroom. Heaven forbid I change their seats because it really is a huge deal to them. And if I do change their seats, a lot of explanation has to go into it. So a lot of times I would prep my students outside of my classroom before they went into the classroom. I would make sure that I had name tags on their desk to show them where their new seats might be. This was something that I learned very early on in the school year, that if I was going to make these changes, it needed to be presented to them prior to making the change. Must follow certain routines, absolutely. I would do a bell ringer activity of having my students write in a journal every day. I would give them a question, this or that, whatever it might be, and just to get their minds going and allow them to relax a little when they first came in. If we did not do that, which I know I've spoken before, that we didn't do it like once or twice in the whole school year, and when that didn't happen, a lot of my students were upset, kept asking me questions about it. Why didn't we do it? Things of that nature. The lining up objects and getting upset if order is changed. I really didn't see a whole lot of that in my classroom. I would believe that would be with elementary students. I didn't do a lot of moving books or anything like that in my classroom. Like their journals were always in the same spot. Their pencils, if they needed to borrow them, were always in the same spot. I didn't move things around in my classroom knowing that a lot of them um, would get upset by those minor changes. Flops hands, rocks body. I would definitely see repetitive movement in my classroom. I would say it also extends to pencil tapping. Um, Sometimes I would give the kids stress balls so they could sit there and squish the ball in their hand repetitively. Um, Definitely, I saw quite a bit of rocking in the chair last year. Um, Okay, and that is the end of the slide. Those are the social characteristics that I have seen in my observations, and a few that I have not seen. And like I said before, the few that I have not seen, I think is strictly the difference in age. I did not get to see those things because I did not see them in a younger learning environment.